Welcome to this family video. The date is the 14th of April 2014. My name is Adrian and I am the son of Charles Beal, who is the unwilling participant of this interview. Now, Charles was born on the 20th of February 1925.
89 years ago.
A long time ago, exactly. And the reason that I've been so keen to do this video is because Charles is the first generation where his life, or their lives, have been able to be recorded both by sound and vision. In other words, Charles is going to be the furthest back in time that you can go to meet our family. It is my hope that this video will be handed down from generation to generation, and that in, say, 10, 20, 50, even 100 years' time, they, or perhaps I should say you, will be able to meet Charles and have a direct link back to this time. So Dad, or should I say Charles, wakey wakey. Take us back to 1925 when you were born and tell us a little bit about what life was like in those days.
Well, regrettably, I can't take you back to 1925. I don't have that perception that Caligula had when he told his court that he remembered the smile on the faces of the midwives as he was brought into this world. But I can go back to about the age of 4, and that's my first and clearest memory.
So 1929, that would have been the Great Depression.
Well, we were getting into bad years as far as I'm told, but the Depression really were more the 30s.
Oh, was it?
And in fact got worse and worse during the 30s. Although there'd been the general strike in 1926, and all the promises of, that had been made to our warriors in the Great War were not being fulfilled, and we'd had our first Labour government, for example. And of course that's all beyond my immediate recall. That is simply information I picked up over the years. But at the age of 4, I do distinctly remember a particular Sunday morning. But to give you those particulars and the details of what happened on that Sunday morning, much else needs to be told beforehand. I was born just inside of legitimacy, as you know, in 1925. And although I wasn't born on the Isle of Sheppey in the county of Kent, for matters of family discretion, I did in fact spend my first 21 years there.
Where were you born?
Well, as far as I can recall my mother saying, I was born at some sort of sanctuary at Milton, which was just a few miles over the bridge at Swale into Kent, in the sort of Sittingbourne area. But it's all quite incidental and unimportant now. My father was a dairy farmer, a highly unsuccessful dairy farmer. And the fact that he wasn't suited to dairy farming in the first place, he'd had a marriage forced upon him, and that he was very much of an academic nature, all mixed together to make for a very unhappy time in those early years.
So your dad, Cuthbert?
Yes, Cuthbert Spurrier.
Cuthbert
Spurrier. His younger brother, Edward Ingleton, carried the second name Ingleton, which was his mother, my grandmother's, maiden name. So I have always assumed, nothing more than assumption, that Spurrier was the maiden name of his father's grandmother.
Oh, I see, right, okay.
But I've never had any follow-up I've never been able to trace that link through.
Because you said that he was born in 1902, I think.
Yes, I have to be very approximate, but around that time, he and my mother differed in age by just a few months.
And she was 1901.
Yes, I think.
Well, when was your mother's birthday? Do you know your mother's birthday?
No, I never actually got used to her birthday. It was at the end of December, and I never got quite used to whether it was the 28th or 29th.
How extraordinary! Because you've confused your birthday from the 19th and the 20th.
Well, yes. Well, there you are. That's what that gives you an indication of the happy, united family that we were. It was really hard going during my boyhood years. I mean, my father treated me very badly. When my younger brother came along, he was given the names of Morris Cuthbert, which was my father's name. And I took this to mean, in later years when I had the sense to work these things out, I came to realise that my father was saying, this is my son, I want nothing to do with the other one. But there was never any hint from my grandparents that there was anything amiss in my birth. It was never, ever referred to. And so I've always assumed that my parents, as I knew them, were in fact my parents. So we lived on this farm. Now my father, as I mentioned before, was of an academic nature. And he was a grammar school boy. And years and years and years later, I met the sister of one of his schoolfellows. And she brought me a message from her brother saying that he wanted me to know that at school, Cuthbert, or Cuth as they called him, was always the boy to beat. Oh. And this man had taken his degree and then his PhD and was doing well. And it was very, very, very astute of him to send me that message, because quite clearly he must have known something of the background that existed at that time.
Now, what was interesting, Dad, is that you say that your father was an academic, which he clearly was.
Well, academically inclined, yes.
Right, but he would have been only about 24 when you were born, so he was a young lad when you were born.
Yeah, he was a young man, yeah.
So he'd obviously gone straight from school, I suppose, into farming, had he?
Well, there I can't help. I don't know what happened. Because one of the things that never happened in my family when I was young was ever we talked. I was in fear of my father. I never spoke to him. I'd keep away, as far away from him as I possibly could. He constantly told me that I was good for nothing, and that over the years I became to believe him, and it's always held me back in life. And he never ever put his arm around me. He never ever gave me a Christmas present or a birthday present.
Really?
Yeah. When it came to my 21st birthday, he did say that he would pay for that, but in fact didn't. I was left holding the expense for that. So the relationship between my father and I was abysmal. Again, in middle years, when I was probably at the peak of my prosperity, my mother was taken into hospital. She and my father had separated by this time. I'm now talking 70s, 1970s. And so I said, well, make absolutely sure that when I visit, he's not there. And I visited, and he was there. He was sitting at one side of the bed, so I went across to the other, held out my hand to shake his hand, and as I did so, repulsion surged through my body. And I realised that for the first time in my life, here I was in my 40s plus, this was the first time in my life that he and I had ever touched. And
Strange.
but his farming life failed. His brother, who was in business with him, bought him out, and my father went into the Admiralty and started to do well. And
Just going back, Dad, a minute to your father, and you talk about the farm. Now, it's very easy just to say he was a farmer and mention the word farm and things like that. And for years and years and years, as I was brought up, the word farm, you conjure up inside your head a lovely farm with farm buildings and hay
Yes.
bales and things like that. And I remember going back to Sheerness with you for the first time, probably 10 years ago or so, and seeing the farm. And I was a little bit surprised, to say the least.
What you and I saw that day really shook me to the core.
Oh, it shook you as well.
Well, it simply wasn't as it had been. I mean, all the farm buildings had gone. It was a
Right.
car dump, wasn't it?
Well, it was. I think it was next door to a car dump. But the point is,
No, that was the farmhouse.
right. Well, the farmhouse was still there, and it's more like it was a bungalow, really, wasn't it?
Well, it was in fact a wooden house, pebble-dashed,
Ah,
with a pebble-dash covering to
so
make it look
solid.
half decent. But there was a beautiful, beautiful ash tree growing at the back of it, which did set it off. And the farm buildings which abutted the house were double-storey for storing hay off the hay carts, into the loft. And then the cow barns.
So it's a dairy farm.
Oh yes, dairy farm, yes. Few pigs from time to time, chickens from time to time, but essentially farming with a milk round in the town, which my uncle, Ted, the younger brother, he looked after the milk round the town. So there was a horse and cart and
So
a
what you're
little
saying,
dairy and
in those days, the local milk round would buy their milk from the local farmers, would they?
absolutely.
So it was nothing. I mean, today, of course, all the milk is just collected by big tankards,
Yes.
taken to one depot, and some huge conglomerate organises.
Yeah,
the
that's
price
right.
for it.
And pasteurisation then
And so yours wasn't pasteurised.
was not.
No.
We had a little dairy where the milk was strained and cooled and simply bottled.
So, with the lack of control, which there obviously was in those days, did people expect to perhaps come ill, because one batch of dodgy milk or something like that?
Well, one wouldn't know it as dodgy. I mean, milk was regarded as a highly nutritious food.
So there weren't cases where you would drink milk and, oh, that batch must have been off,
No, I mean, very often we had milk straight from the cow into our little kitchen,
Wow.
with the froth and the bits of hay still floating on the top, and you just brush them off with your finger and drink, and the milk would be warm, of course.
Oh, incredible. And taste completely different to
Well,
what
so
we're
much
used
nicer,
to.
so much nicer, so
Well,
much
very fatty, of course,
and sweeter. Well, farms regulated the fat content. If you had a Guernsey herd, for example, I'm quoting figures which may not prove to be right, but I think I'm right in saying that if you had a dairy herd, then the butter content was up to about 4% or something. But if you had a Frisian herd, the butter content would be below 2%. So most dairy farms, would mix their herd.
Ah, right.
I'm speaking in broad terms. Frisians and Guernseys or Jerseys, virtually the same. And that's what our farm was. But it was a tuppenny halfpenny outfit.
Not many acres, was it?
32,
32 acres.
which was very small, and it didn't support the family, and so life was fairly difficult. But my mother was very good in terms of making the pennies stretch.
Well, of course, there were 3 of you in those days, wasn't it?
Well, later
Morris-
on, Margaret came along in 39. No, 38.
Yeah,
She came along.
and you were still on the farm. She was born on the farm, or
Oh yes, that's right. I tipped her out of a pram, I remember. And that was on the lawn outside the house. Yeah, that's right. I was flinging. Well, there were prams those days in terms of the Silver Cross. You know, great stately things compared with what one sees around the street today. And I was swinging it around the garden, the whole thing tipped over, and the baby flew out, and I put it back in and rocked it.
But of course, that farmhouse, that must have been, what, 2-bedroom?
Yes, there were 4 rooms in total.
Yeah.
There was no bathroom, of course, but then there was no running water, so who wants a bathroom? And there was no electricity,
No?
so we had our toilet, in fact, was a hayline bucket,
Really?
which my father had the pleasure of dealing with. So very early in life, we 2 boys were taught to use the cow barns.
Very nice in the winter. So no central heating, nothing of, in terms of modern facilities that we have now.
Well, when I think of the coal fires that we had there, and when I think of the flimsiness of the whole structure, it's just incredible that house is still standing. You know, just one woof and it would go. But life away from my father was quite different. I was sort of divided into 2 parts, with him and without him, so to speak. And life on the Isle of Sheppey for a boy was terrific.
Was it?
Oh yes.
Well, you had the little river by the side of your farm.
Well,
didn't you?
that was the canal, which was a defensive moat around Sheerness, but more particularly Sheerness Dockyard.
Right.
And that moat opens up to the sea at both ends, and that was the source of a great deal of fun. We used to make rafts and things and go out there. I remember we made a raft out of old oil drums.
So who's we, Dad?
Well, there'd be my brother, he'd always hang on, you know. And
Who was, how
the
many years
boys
younger than you? 9 years younger than you?
No, 3 years younger.
Oh, all right, yeah.
No, boys from school. I mean, if you've got a farm to play on, I mean, you've got plenty of friends, haven't you? And so we would have to wait until my father disappeared from view, and when the mouse was away, and the cat's away, the mouse do play. So life without him was really great. I mean, there was the seafront, and the beach.
That's a long way from you, Dad.
No. Well,
All right.
distances in those days for children was so much shorter. I mean, I was never taken to school. I used to run through the alleyways and so on, across the road and to school. And
Which is what, 2 miles?
oh no.
That's
I suppose my first school that I went to would have been 3/4 of a mile.
right.
And my other grandparents, the Kirkpatricks, they lived in the town of Sheerness, and they gave me my lunch. So I'd go from the school, whichever school I was in 4 schools in Sheerness altogether, so I could go to them for lunch. And that was good of my grandmother Kirkpatrick, because it helped relieve my mother's strained budget. If she if she hadn't got her 2 sons to feed. So and Minster Cliffs. I mean, when I see Minster Cliffs today, I'm rather taken aback by how diminutive and scruffy they are, and they're very wet, and erosion continues to take place. And in fact, I have a map of the island taken back in Doomsday times, which suggests that there has been 10 miles of erosion.
Really?
And Minster, which is the principal town, principal village of medieval times, was shown in the middle of the island. Well, now it's very close to the edge of the cliffs.
But so Minster, what was the name of the town, the big town?
Sheerness.
It is Sheerness. So it was either Sheppey, Sheerness. And you had family there, and the dairy. What was the dairy all about, Dad?
Well, it was just where the milk was prepared and distributed.
But this dairy was part of the family, wasn't it?
Oh yes, my grandmother Beal and her husband, my grandfather Samuel Beal, they lived there.
Your father's parents owned the dairy.
It was my grandmother. She was the driving force in the family. And she had a husband that needed driving,
Yeah.
2 sons that needed driving. I mean, she had a formidable task on her hand, and she did it so well. I mean, she is the joy of my life.
And she was the Kirkpatrick, wasn't she? She was the Kirkpatrick.
No, the Ingleton.
Oh, the Ingleton, sorry.
No, it's very important in my story to keep the Kirkpatricks and the Ingletons separate, because they were quite separate in everything. The Kirkpatricks were purely working class people. My grandfather Kirkpatrick was a very ordinary sort of, I don't know, storehouseman, I think, in the dockyard. But I've always given him enormous credit because he bought his terraced house, he raised 4 children. They always had some money to spend. He kept an allotment, he kept chickens. My grandmother was forever knitting. And so they were a very self-contained family dealing with their own needs. And that is why I'm so distressed by present day family attitudes of where it's all the government's fault and why don't they give them more money. Whereas if you take that Kirkpatrick family doing what they had to do to stay together, and he did it. And when he left his house and a few £100, I suppose, but so I give him great credit. The fact that he was an old misery, because it was an unfortunate.
Probably explains a bit about your mum's character, perhaps. But so that was the Kirkpatrick side, which is your mother's side.
The Ingleton side were quite different. They were prosperous, they were middle class. But there was a failing in their reproduction system, and although I can't quite remember how many children were there in the brothers and sisters my grandmother Beal had, but so few of them reproduced families of their own. Frank Ingleton did, he produced 4, and Edward Ingleton, he produced 1, and Louise Downham, as she became, she produced 4, 3 of them girls, who remained spinsters all their lives. So it was an extraordinary mix, but those Edwardian and Victorian Ingletons were very successful. Basically farming, arable farming, and 2 of them went overseas. There was a great drive during Victorian days to populate the growing colony. So they responded to the call. One went to Argentina, did extraordinarily well, and another one went to Canada and he did moderately well as far as I understand. And Charles, the uncle after whom I'm named, he had no children, but he was a pillar of the local church, so to speak. He was a JP and church warden, all the sorts of things that.
So for a little place like Sheerness, you've got 2 children there, one in Canada, one in Argentina. So our family will spread into those 2 countries by now.
Well, they were the Ingletons.
Mm.
And as far as the Beal spreading, my uncle, my father's brother, he went to Canada and he prospered. But he's dead long since dead.
Mm.
So in fact, you have a cousin or maybe 2 cousins somewhere out there.
In Canada.
But how you would trace them down now, if you wanted to, I don't know.
No, it's just
But,
one day in the future somewhere.
Perhaps if there's a historian watching this screen amongst the Beals, they might go ferreting and find out what happened to them.
You see, this is obviously one of the main reasons that I want to do this video, is because family trees and things, they get lost in time, of course they do. But now we're in a world of digital information and imaging and things like that, and it's just so easy to capture everything and therefore not forget.
Well, if you feel there's a need for it?
Never a need, because we can just carry on the way we are, but it's just nice to have a sense of roots. It's nice to meet the ancestors. I mean, at the moment there's a television programme that's going on, isn't there? I think it's called Meet the Ancestors.
Who do you think you are?
Who do you think you are?
Yes, some of those are very, very interesting.
Well, there you go, Dad. They're interesting, and yet you know nothing about the person or the family. And they're obviously going to be a famous person, but you don't know anything about their family. It really isn't very interesting to us, and yet it is when it's traced back, and you know it comes to life. So this is why the video is here anyway.
Because of my relationship with my father, I grew very, very attached to my grandmother Beal. As I said before, darling, darling lady. And I hope that you'll look after the brass elephant that I have of hers. And in my deed box you'll find a photograph of her in a silver frame and her wedding ring.
Oh, really?
And I think you'll find her death certificate there as well.
And this you call Aunt Mouse?
No, that was my grandmother Beal. Now, she was at the tail end of a large Victorian Edwardian family. Oh, there were 12 children. I remember the reason for it now. And their procreation was just extraordinary, because the first 6 were boys and the second 6 were girls.
Oh, wow.
Now,
Gosh.
their father, Edward Ingleton, he was obviously a hard-working, prosperous sort of man. In fact, I think my brother Morris looked him up in 1 or if not 2 census of the 19th century. And it showed him at the age of 29, I think, and he got 4 farmhands and so on. So he was already beginning to make way in life, producing these children. Of course, he had need to. But then, I think it was at the age of 54 or in his 50s, he had an accident, and he had an eye damaged. Now, here again, I'm terribly, terribly sketchy, but my understanding is that as a result of that, he died young, which was unfortunate for the 6 girls, because here was my great-grandmother left with the business, the farming business, the elder boys beginning to flap their wings and fly from home, and she's left with these young children. And so in point of fact, all those young girls did not marry well. My Aunt Mouse did the best out of all of them. My great aunt Diane married a registrar of births and deaths in Westminster in London, and Aunt Mouse, her second husband, was something to do in the Admiralty and doing rather well. And her bits and pieces that she had around her in her retirement clearly indicated that they had done well enough. So, and Louise, who, as I say, became Downham, she married, and as the story goes, lived unhappily ever after.
Oh.
And she produced these 4 children. Frank Ingleton, he married a Love, and the Loves were another farming family on the island, and the interrelationships between the two families produced children which were mentally defective. And my cousin Clarice was one of them.
Oh, she's the one that got put into her home?
Yes, that's right. And she and I became very close friends. And she was taken away to a mental home. And I can remember her brother, Alfred Ingleton, saying to me that she'd been made a ward of court, you know, to protect her money, because she inherited quite well from her father. So they were a nice, prosperous family. Church-going, God-fearing, honest. There wasn't a dishonest one amongst them.
Where did the name Aunt Mouse come from? Obviously the aunt bit's clear. But
Well, she was so small. It was her brothers called her Mouse.
Oh, I see.
And
Her real name being?
Sarah Ann.
Right.
And she dropped the O in later life and became Aunt Muse. But she played the piano beautifully.
Oh,
And she taught me what I knew of the piano.
So that picture that you've got, Dad, is that her playing? Because there was a picture somewhere in the albums that I've seen of her by the piano.
That's Aunt Mouse playing the piano.
Yeah.
And she's wearing her evening cap of silk and
That's
lace.
right. Well, is that a cap? Because I'll tell you what, it looks as though she's just come out of the shower.
Well, yes, it's that sort of thing. She wore, not a wig, she wore what she called a transformation. And this transformation was shown to me one day. But of course, at the same time, she was showing me that, I was looking at her bald head.
Oh.
But so this transformation went on, but it came off at night, and on went the little bonnet. It's the sort of thing they did in those days, and I wish it was still the same way today. It was all so nice. So I became very fond of her, and so she and my grandmother really, in their way, substituted for my parents.
Mm. And of course, Aunt Mouse is buried on the Isle of Sheppey, and we saw we did visit the graveyard, didn't we? But of course, time takes its toll on these things, doesn't it? And one of the things I know that you are keen that this video can do is to maintain Aunt Mouse's memory, because you feel, and probably quite rightly, that you are the last link back to this woman that you love so much. And of course, when you've gone, there is no more link, and she will rapidly disappear.
Well, that was the awful moment when we stood looking at those graves. As you may remember, there were 4 of them.
Yes.
With my grandparents, Beal, Aunt Pucky and her second husband, Charles Ingleton and his wife, and Diana Craddock, but not her husband, I don't think. And all dilapidated.
Mm.
But yet I remember, you know, as a boy and into my youth, I was sent up to the cemetery with a pumice stone to clean off the lichen. Wretched job that was too. But and as you stood beside me, I realised that they meant nothing to you. And that when I died, there was nobody who would know anything about them. That is why I think, that is one of the reasons why I think cremation is so much better.
I disagree, because I actually like the idea of having a headstone that will last for years and years and years, and you know, particularly hundreds of years, because there are occasions, and it's only an occasion, where I might go into a graveyard and I'm just fascinated to look at those headstones. Now, I don't know that person, but if I can look at a headstone that's dated 1780 or something like that, the name will just go. It's very. I find that interesting, because it's just taking you back to a reference point. That,
yes, but it's just name and date on a piece of stone, isn't it?
Well, it is name and a date, but it does transport you back in your imagination to what the churchyard looked like the day that they were being buried around there, and the dress of the people that were buried around them. So these things do take you back, and I think I don't suppose I'm the only person that gets some sort of strange pleasure from looking at the headstones in a churchyard.
Well, that's absolutely true, because I used to like to go and look at my great-grandparents' headstones. The cemetery that we stood in was the newer one. The old Minster Cemetery was further down towards the sea, down what is known as Lovers Lane, and that was very dark and murky and overgrown with yew trees and that sort of thing. And there were all these headstones at irregular angles and so on, except one. And this was a red granite stone of decent size. And on it were the names of my great-great-grandparents, Edward and Caroline Ingleton, and one or two of the other members of the family and so on. And and I was proud of that. So I do follow your reason, but it's gone now.
Yes, I mean, they go, but better that they hung around for some time than today's crematorium, which that is it, and it's gone and there's nothing.
Well, you can leave name and date at the crematorium. There's facilities for doing that.
I don't think it will hold the appeal to go to a crematorium and read some names and dates as it does to go to a churchyard. I mean, the church, whether you're religious or not, a church is quite an interesting, or a churchyard is quite an interesting place to visit.
Well, this is something in my family at around the time that my life story begins to get underway. And Nana Beal and Aunt Mouse was a widow and spending half her time with one sister, my Nana, and half her time with Diana in Westminster. And when the two sisters were together, they liked to go to the old Abbey Church. Now, the old Abbey Church holds huge memories for me. And you may remember we went and had a look at it, and how upset I was to see what it is today. My elderly folk told me the other day when they used to go to church in the high-sided pews. And they had their own pew, and it had its own little door onto the aisle. Well, of course, all that went before my time, but we always sat on the left, third aisle from the front. I mean, and if anybody went there, if somebody else went there, you were rather piqued. I mean, it was one of those silly little things. But so Nana and my aunt, great aunt, used to catch the bus up to Abbey Church, enjoy the service there, then walk from the church down Upper Wards Hill, past where they spent their childhood at Upper Wards Farm, and down to visit their ageing brother, Charles. And I used to, and I lived just a few minutes from the dairy. So I used to run down on a Sunday morning to be with them and get on the bus, go upstairs, sit at the front, and I loved being with them. I mean, I just really loved being with them. And on one occasion, I was late. And I was just coming into the front garden of the farm when the bus passed by, and there were my aunt and grandmother. Now, I can remember that I was about 4.
Oh.
I'm not quite sure how I piece it together, but the memory is clear in my mind. And the passing years don't distort this memory. I mean, the passing years distort so many memories. But I simply went out of the gate, turned left, and followed up the road to catch up with them. Well, that was about 3 miles to the Abbey Church. And there's a couple of nasty hills. There was Bat and Ball Hill, I remember, and then there was the hill leading up to the church itself. But of course, by the time I got there, I got there, but by the time I did so, the service was over, the church was empty.
And you think you were about 4 years of age?
Yes, I know that I must have been.
Walking all that way down?
Yes. And so I thought, well, there with Uncle Charles. So off I went down up towards Ward's Hill and met them on their way back. They'd finished their visit and were on their way back to get their bus back down to Sheerness. So, and my memory fades at that point.
Where would your mother have been at this point?
At home.
With her 4-year-old son
Well,
wandering the
as far
street?
as she was concerned, I'd gone to meet my grandmother.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so you had left home as a 4 or 5-year-old,
No, not 5. I must have been 4.
a 4-year-old, to leave your home on your own to walk to meet your grandmother?
Well, leaving my home, I don't think would have had much importance for me.
I'm talking about from a mother's point of view, to leave her 4-year-old
Well, if my
son.
father were around, I'd want to be away anyway, even at that age. So, and these are the 2 people, my life. Anyway, that is my first recollection, and I remember it was nice weather.
Now, Dad, before we take a break, because we'll take a break shortly and come back to your story maybe next week. You've always said to me about working in the dairy, and my recollection of the dairy is that it's actually in the town.
Yes.
It was like a normal house, in fact, that we would just consider as an end of terrace type
Yes,
house.
with dairy facilities. It was a small outfit. The whole thing was a small outfit.
So, and this was the Ingleton's dairy,
Yes.
and you worked there? Did you work there, or did you just visit there?
No. I helped from time to time. I can remember making the cream, turning the handle to separate the milk into skim milk and cream, and it had a little bell with a little ball bearing that fell up and down the slot, and when it got to the top it fell down, pinged, and up to top, pinged, and you had to keep the pings going, ping, ping, ping. And out would drip the cream there, and out would gush the skim milk there.
Oh, really?
Mm.
And you would have been, what, 6-ish or something like that?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you do lose track of age. I mean, that would have gone on.
Because it's just interesting that your recollection of that, and for me, of course, I have a similar sort of recollection, but mine is going back to Hitchin days, and I guess I would have been about 8, perhaps, when you had the factory in Hitchin. And I was given a task to to a machine to put some, well, I don't know what it was, I can't remember, but it was all about some clocks for cars, wasn't it? I think putting the numbers on together on a spindle or something like that.
Oh yes, that's right.
But how old would I be then?
Mileometers.
Yes, mileometers. I'd probably been about 8 or 9, would I? I think I'd probably just started school. I can't remember. Well, I can't remember when Hitchin...
you were born in 56.
1956. Hitchin would have been...
Gosh, that was all earlier than I... But it's got to be in the 60s, hasn't it?
Yes, definitely in the 60s.
Yeah, you were young.
But it was just interesting. So
you pay your school fees at little factory.
Did it? Mm. So anyway, that was so. You just reminded me of that. Of course, when you're talking about working in the dairy, and to hear you talking about working in the dairy brings.
Well, I don't want you to get grand ideas, you know, of United Dairies or something.
No, Dad. I've been to this place. I have no grand ideas about the farm.
No.
And I've got no grand ideas about the dairy. As I say, the dairy was just the size of a house, an end terrace, but it was quite deep, and obviously.
But that house contains cherished memories for me.
Ah.
We spent our Christmases there, for example. They were always lovely affairs. The Beals and the Kirkpatricks never, ever came together. My father never, ever visited his in-laws. He attended their funeral. He probably had a malicious thought or two in mind at that time. And my grandfather, Kirkpatrick, was derogatory in his remarks about what was his son-in-law, but never admitted it in conversation. So it was a very unhappy situation from the beginning.
Well, as you say, it was out. Oh no, just you were conceived out of wedlock.
Way out.
And an arranged marriage, and one that obviously your father had a fling, and it wasn't necessarily the woman that he would have intended to have married. But
I got the impression over the years that my mother loved him.
Ah.
And I think, although she said some very nasty things about him from time to time, if she was only being truthful after all, I don't think that makes any difference to love. You don't have to like a person if you love them.
Interesting concept, that.
Mm.
But your mother, my recollection of her, nice lady, I'm sure, but I always found her so cold.
Yes.
So cold.
Yes.
And,
she took after her parents.
Yeah.
They're both the same.
Just
I can't remember her loving me, and I don't remember them, well, my father certainly not, I don't ever remember my mother playing with me. I mean, when I see Yulia, for example, and the way she behaves towards her children, I'm really quite envious, because, I mean, she is truly bringing her children up in the correct manner. But I think what my mother used to like doing was showing me off a bit. I mean, she and I would often go off, but when my father was being particularly abusive towards her, I mean, off we would rush screaming and crying to my Kirkpatrick grandparents to seek a haven for the night until the storm abated. And that happened many, many times.
Well, we're going to move off the farm and up into your time in the dockyards shortly. So, as a farewell to your youngest days on the farm, what was your happiest memory in terms of maybe you did something naughty and got away with it, playing in the hay loft or something? Was there a particular thing that you did that actually you can focus on for your farm days and think, well, I enjoyed that part at least?
Well,
I hope you're going to say yes.
When I was at junior school, I had to have some dental treatment, and the dentist say, oh, this needs gas. Now, that had its good side to it, because it meant that you were free from school for the rest of the day. So I'd had this tooth, whatever happened to, extracted, I suppose, and I was left for the day. Well, the farm was divided up into fields, and one field was always left, the gates closed and the grass allowed to grow, to make hay for fodder for the winter feeding. And on this occasion, again, of course, childhood memories are invariably in sunny weather, but that afternoon I was crawling through the hay. I mean, I knew I was doing wrong. I knew I wasn't allowed past those gates, but past those gates I went. And I went off on safari or something, or hunting tiger or giraffe or something, in the long grass. And suddenly I heard the roar of my father's voice. How he knew I was out there, because it was some way away. And God, I got a beating for that, because I'd been pressing down the hay, the grass, so the cutters couldn't get at it too.
So that's it.
So that's one of my well, it's one of my strongest recollections.
Yeah, it's not particularly a happy one,
But-
beating at the end of the day. But
Moorhen's eggs, hunting out the moorhen's eggs. There was a ditch or a dike running around the perimeter of the farm, and in one area it opened up quite wide and allowed room for moorhens to nest. So putting on your Wellingtons and wading into the dark, sludgy, silty water to get at the moorhen's eggs, and the water seeping over the top of the Wellington. Total mess that you were in. You see, you've got to go home and present yourself, you know, soaking wet and muddy. And but moorhen's eggs.
fantastic.
Moorhen's eggs.
But surely there must have been a snoggle too in the hay barn at some point.
Snoggle? Not at that
Snoggle
age.
too, a kiss with a girlfriend up in the hay
No,
barn.
not at that stage.
No.
No. I don't think I would ever have dared taken a girlfriend up.
No.
I think that would have been. In fact, I would have been too ashamed to. I mean, you know how you like to show off to girlfriend, and I don't think that I would have been particularly proud to take them back.
I think that's a shame because the thing that I would like the most about living on a farm was to be able to play in the hay barn and maybe have a snuggle.
Oh, I did that. I mean, we had a hell of a time,
Mm.
and chaff cutting was great fun.
What's chaff cutting?
Well, cows can't open their mouths, jaws, very far. They have a very small angle of opening. And so things like mangel wurzels, which are good for their diet, have to be chopped up so the cows can actually grip them. And so cutting up the mangel wurzels was always fun enough, I suppose. Well, the way we did it was. And chaff cutting was getting the hay. You'd have a blade, circular blade, running round and round, with a canvas belt dry, back to a little engine, with a long shallow trough coming up to them on a runway, and you'd feed in the hay this end, and it would get chopped into short lengths called chaff for the feed at the other end.
Yes, I see.
And of course, chaff has a lot of pollen, has a lot of dust, and you get into a rare old mess with chaff cutting. So that used to be fun.
That couldn't have had any bearing on your TB in later years, could it?
It's questionable. I mean, bovine TB was never mentioned to me during those TB days, so I'm not sure that it did. And it didn't affect any other member of the family.
No. And the equipment that you had on the farm, Dad, what sort of equipment? Because I mean, today we'd be expecting tractors. I mean, you must have had a tractor.
What for?
Oh, I suppose
We had no need for a tractor.
Not for drawing something to cut the grass and things like that?
Oh yes, well, in those days, of course, and I think it's still done, there's sort of collective hire. You hire from the pool,
Okay,
and you'll have a squad go round
right.
from farm to farm.
So the only equipment that you needed, obviously, was going
Although, wait a minute, we did have a hay cutter. Yeah, because when it was not in use, the seat was on a springy,
Oh,
1
okay.
inch width of steel that
Yes,
came up
yeah,
from the
yeah.
engine, and you'd sit on that. And so yes, of course we did have that, and we had a horse to pull it
Oh, it was horse-drawn.
in the early days,
Right.
and with the old hay wagon with everything tossed up.
That was a horse-drawn hay wagon.
Yes, and that yes. But building the haystacks, I mean, that was tremendous fun.
Hard work.
Not when you're a boy. You're busy climbing up on the hay wagon, jumping onto the haystack, sliding down the side, being told to sod off and taking no notice. So, and my father kept a greyhound at some stage, Jimmy. Oh, of course, then there was Jack, the dog. He was great. He was a short-haired terrier. He was a lovely, lovely dog. And this Jimmy used to like to come out jumping on haystacks and sliding down the side. Oh no, there was plenty of fun when my father wasn't about. I mean, and he wouldn't be. You see, it's understandable that he wouldn't be. It wasn't his inclination, all that sort of thing. It was hard work enough that he had to do the milking. This was David's old milking machines.
Very hard, very little. And of course he gambled a fair bit, didn't he, to try and...
Well, he
change
gambled
it.
and drank. I mean, this was just his reaction to the situation in which he found himself.
So shorter funds became even shorter of funds. But,
Yes, and well, we'll not talk about him anymore.
Difficult for your mum. Yeah, okay, Dad, well, we'll end it there. Thank you very much indeed for that fascinating insight. And we'll return to the Docklands.
Dockyard, yeah.